Chapter 1. The Invitation to Shadows. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the windows of Hercule Poirot's London apartment, a soft percussion that seemed to underscore the quiet ticking of the mantel clock. It was a dreary October afternoon in 1932, and Poirot sat in his favourite armchair, a cup of steaming tisane in hand, his neatly trimmed moustache twitching slightly as he perused a letter that had arrived that morning. The envelope, embossed with an elegant crest, bore the faint scent of lavender and age, as though it had been stored in a drawer for years before being sent. The contents of the letter, however, were far more intriguing than its exterior. Monsieur Poirot, it began in a precise, almost hesitant hand, I write to you in the utmost confidence, for your reputation as a detective of unparalleled insight precedes you. My name is Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, and I reside at Blackthorn Manor in the village of Ashmore, Sussex. I implore your assistance in a matter most peculiar and distressing, one that involves whispers of the supernatural and secrets long buried within my family's walls. I cannot divulge more in writing, for reasons that will become clear upon your arrival. Please join us at the Manor this Friday evening. Your presence is our only hope to unravel this mystery. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Blackthorn Poirot set the letter down, his sharp green eyes narrowing as he tapped a manicured finger against his chin. Mon Dieu, he murmured to himself. A mystery cloaked in the veil of the supernatural? This is most intriguing. He had encountered many cases in his illustrious career, but few began with such an air of Gothic drama. The mention of Blackthorn Manor stirred a faint memory, an old tale of a cursed estate, perhaps, or a scandal whispered in society circles. But the details eluded him, and that alone was enough to pique his curiosity. He rose, his movements precise and deliberate, and crossed to his desk, where a small stack of correspondence awaited. Among the letters was a note from his friend Captain Hastings, who was currently visiting relatives in the countryside. Poirot sighed. Hastings's earnest but often muddled observations would have been a comfort in this case, but he would have to proceed alone. He penned a brief reply to Lady Eleanor, confirming his attendance, and then rang for his valet George to prepare his travel arrangements. George, Poirot said as the valet appeared, you will arrange for me to travel to Ashmore, Sussex on Friday morning, and please ensure that my overcoat, the one with the velvet collar, is ready. The English countryside, it is always damp. Of course, sir, George replied with a nod, accustomed to Poirot's fastidiousness. As Friday dawned, Poirot found himself on a train rattling through the misty fields of Sussex. The landscape was a patchwork of autumnal hues, gold, amber, and crimson, though the sky remained stubbornly grey. Adjusted his Homburg hat and reviewed the letter once more, committing its sparse details to memory. Lady Eleanor's tone suggested urgency, yet her reticence to elaborate hinted at fear, or perhaps shame. Poirot's mind, ever active, began to construct possibilities. A family dispute, a contested inheritance, or perhaps a clever ruse disguised as a ghostly tale. He smiled faintly. The little grey cells, they are already at work, he mused. The train deposited him at Ashmore Station, a small windswept platform where a driver awaited, holding a sign with his name. The man, a grizzled fellow named Mr. Cobb, was taciturn, offering only a grunt as he led Poirot to a sleek Rolls-Royce. The drive to Blackthorn Manor was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the vehicle as it navigated winding lanes. Poirot observed the scenery with interest. Gnarled oaks lined the road, their branches forming a skeletal canopy. And in the distance he glimpsed the silhouette of the manor itself, a sprawling Gothic edifice perched on a low hill. Blackthorn Manor was as imposing as its reputation suggested. Its stone facade, weathered by centuries, was adorned with ivy that clung like grasping fingers. Tall arched windows stared down like unblinking eyes, and a pair of gargoyles flanked the entrance, their expressions frozen in silent warning. As Poirot stepped from the car, a chill wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something less definable, something that made the hairs on his neck prickle. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a butler whose gaunt frame and pallid complexion seemed to belong to the manor itself. "Monsieur Poirot?" he inquired in a voice as dry as old parchment. "I am Withers, the butler. Lady Eleanor awaits you in the drawing-room. If you'll follow me." Poirot nodded, his eyes already cataloguing the details of the entrance hall. A grand chandelier, its crystals dulled by dust, a faded tapestry depicting a hunt, and a staircase that spiraled upward into shadow. The air was thick with the musty odour of age, and as they passed a portrait of a stern-faced man in Regency attire, Poirot thought he detected a faint draught, as though the manor itself were breathing. The drawing-room was a contrast of faded opulence and warmth. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across walls lined with bookshelves and heavy velvet curtains. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the grey light. She was a woman of perhaps 50, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her posture regal yet tense. She turned as Poirot entered, her eyes a striking shade of hazel, betraying both relief and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming," she said, her voice cultured but strained. "I feared you might dismiss my letter as the ravings of a foolish woman." "Madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "Hercule, Poirot does not dismiss any matter that troubles the heart or the mind. You spoke of a mystery, and I am here to lend my little grey cells to its resolution. Pray, tell me more." Lady Eleanor gestured to a chair, and Poirot sat, his posture impeccable. She hesitated, twisting a lace handkerchief in her hands before beginning. "Blackthorn Manor has been in my family for generations, but it is not a happy place. There are stories, whispers of a ghost, a figure tied to a tragedy that occurred a century ago. Recently, these disturbances have grown more frequent. Sightings, sounds in the night, objects moving of their own accord. My household is in disarray, and I fear there is more to this than mere superstition." Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled. "And who resides in this manor, madame?" "I must know the players in this drama. My nephew, Charles, who manages the estate, my niece, Beatrice, a nervous girl, and Dr. Mortimer, a family friend and scholar of local history. There are also the servants, Withers the butler, Mrs. Grange, the housekeeper, and a young maid, Clara. Each has their own perspective on these occurrences." "Occurrences," Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. "And have you yourself witnessed this ghost?" Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "Once, a figure in white, fleeting at the end of the corridor. I thought it a trick of the light, but others have seen it too. And then there are the letters, anonymous, threatening, left in strange places." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Letters, you say? This is most interesting. May I see them?" "They are in my study," she replied. "But I warn you, Monsieur Poirot, they are unsettling." As she led him toward the study, a sudden gust rattled the windows, and the fire dimmed briefly, casting the room into shadow. Poirot's gaze darted to the corners, his senses alert. The game, as he often called it, had begun, and Blackthorn Manor was a board filled with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 2. Arrival at the Cursed Estate. The Rolls-Royce lurched to a stop before the looming gates of Blackthorn Manor, as thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the estate. Hercule Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat, his sharp eyes scanning the Gothic silhouette of the manor through the rain-streaked window. The storm had worsened during the drive from Ashmore Station, and now sheets of rain battered the car, blurring the outlines of the gargoyle-topped pillars that flanked the entrance. Poirot, ever meticulous, ensured his overcoat was buttoned to the collar before stepping out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the gravel drive. Mr. Cobb, the driver, offered no assistance, merely grunting as he retrieved Poirot's small leather suitcase from the boot. "Mind the steps, sir," he muttered, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "They're slick as ice." Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching with mild annoyance at the lack of decorum, but his focus remained on the manor. Its towers pierced the low clouds, and the ivy clinging to its walls seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air carried a damp chill, tinged with the scent of moss and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Withers, the gaunt butler, appeared at the door as if summoned by the storm itself, his skeletal frame barely filling the tailored black suit. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome to Blackthorn Manor," he intoned, his voice as hollow as the hall behind him. "Lady Eleanor is expecting you." "Please, this way." Poirot followed, his senses alert, cataloguing every detail. The creak of the oak door, the faint flicker of gas lamps struggling against the gloom, and the oppressive weight of the air, as though the manor held its breath. The entrance hall was a cavern of faded grandeur. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dulled by neglect, casting fractured light across a marble floor veined with cracks. A grand staircase spiraled upward into darkness, its banister carved with intricate vines that seemed to writhe in the shadows. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects, stern men and women in antiquated dress, staring down with disapproval. One painting, larger than the rest, depicted a woman in a white gown, her eyes hauntingly lifelike. Poirot paused, noting the plaque beneath, Lady Margaret Blackthorn, 1827. A significant figure, perhaps, he murmured to himself. Withers led him to a drawing-room where a fire roared, its warmth battling the chill that seeped through the walls. Lady Eleanor stood by a tall window, her silhouette stark against the storm's grey backdrop. She turned, her hazel eyes flickering with relief and unease. "Monsieur Poirot, you've arrived at last," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I feared the storm might delay you." "Madame, Hercule Poirot is not deterred by a little rain," he replied, bowing slightly. "Though I confess this manor it has an atmosphere most formidable." Before Lady Eleanor could respond, the door opened and 3 figures entered, each distinct in demeanour. The first was a young man, perhaps 30, with sharp features and a restless energy. His tweed suit was impeccably tailored, but his tie was slightly askew, as though he'd been pacing. "Charles Blackthorn," he introduced himself, extending a hand with forced cordiality. "Lady Eleanor's nephew. I manage the estate, for what it's worth in this crumbling pile." The second was a young woman, barely 20, her pale face framed by dark curls. She clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. "Beatrice," she whispered, barely audible, I'm Charles's cousin." Her voice trembled, and she seemed to shrink under Poirot's gaze. The third was an older man, his hair grey and his posture stooped, yet his eyes gleamed with a scholar's intensity. "Dr. Mortimer," he said, his handshake firm, "I study local history and have known the Blackthorns for years. A fascinating family, though not without its shadows. Poirot observed them all, his mind already sorting impressions. Charles's brusqueness suggested frustration, Beatrice's timidity hinted at fear, and Dr. Mortimer's calm curiosity felt almost too composed. "A pleasure to meet you all," Poirot said, his tone polite but probing. "Lady Eleanor has spoken of disturbances. I am most curious to learn your perspectives." Before anyone could reply, a piercing scream echoed from somewhere deep in the manor. Beatrice gasped, clutching Charles's arm, while Lady Eleanor's face paled. Dr. Mortimer's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Withers, unflappable, appeared at the door. "That would be Clara, the maid," he said. "She's prone to hysterics." "Prone, perhaps, but not without cause," Poirot said, his voice sharp. "Lead me to her, if you please." They followed Withers through a maze of corridors, the walls lined with faded tapestries and tarnished sconces. The scream had come from the west wing, a dimly lit passage where the air grew colder and the shadows deeper. Clara, a young woman with wide eyes and trembling hands, stood by a tall window, pointing at the glass. "I saw it!" she cried. "A figure in white, out there in the garden, moving through the rain." Poirot approached the window, his eyes scanning the drenched lawn below. The garden was a tangle of overgrown roses and skeletal trees, but no figure was visible. He noted, however, a faint smudge on the glass, as though a hand had pressed against it from the outside. "Interesting," he murmured, turning to Clara. "Describe this figure, mademoiselle." "It was pale, like a ghost," Clara stammered. "A woman, I think, in a long dress." "She was there one moment, then gone." Charles snorted. "Nonsense! It's just the storm playing tricks." But his voice lacked conviction, and Beatrice's grip on his arm tightened. "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "But Hercule Poirot does not dismiss what is seen, only seeks to understand it. Tell me, Clara, has this figure appeared before?" Clara nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "3 times this month. Always at night, always in the garden or the west wing," Lady Eleanor interjected, her voice tight. "This is why I summoned you, Monsieur Poirot. These sightings, these disturbances, they are tearing my household apart." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Fear not, madame. The truth, it hides in the shadows, but it cannot evade Poirot for long." He turned to the group, his gaze sweeping over each face. "I will need to speak with each of you, and I will examine this manor thoroughly. The ghost, if it exists, will reveal its secrets or its deceptions." As they returned to the drawing-room, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the manor's grim facade. Poirot's mind buzzed with questions. Was the figure a genuine apparition, a trick of light, or a calculated ruse? Who stood to gain from such fear? And what of the smudge on the window, accidental or deliberate? He smiled faintly, relishing the challenge. Blackthorn Manor was a puzzle, and he, Hercule Poirot, was determined to solve it. Chapter 3. Whispers from the Past. The storm had settled into a persistent drizzle by the morning following Hercule Poirot's arrival at Blackthorn Manor, casting a grey veil over the estate that seemed to deepen its air of melancholy. Poirot sat in the drawing-room, a cup of perfectly brewed coffee, insisted upon despite Mrs. Granger's bemused protests, warming his hands. The events of the previous night, particularly Clara's sighting of the ghostly figure, had set his little grey cells into a frenzy of activity. He had resolved to begin his investigation by delving into the manor's history, for he suspected that the roots of this mystery lay not in the present, but in the shadows of the past. Lady Eleanor joined him shortly after breakfast, her face drawn but composed. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, settling into a high-backed chair, "you mentioned last night that you wished to learn more about the manor's history. I have gathered some materials that may be of use." She gestured to a small mahogany table, where a collection of leather-bound diaries, yellowed letters, and a heavy tome labelled Chronicles of Ashmore awaited. "Excellent, madame," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "The past, it is often the key to the present. Tell me, what stories does Blackthorn Manor hold?" Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, as though the act of speaking about the manor's history was itself a burden. "The Blackthorns have lived here since the 17th century, she began. "The manor was built by Sir Reginald Blackthorn, a merchant who amassed a fortune in trade. But the family's prosperity has always been shadowed by tragedy. The most infamous tale concerns Lady Margaret Blackthorn, who died in 1827 under mysterious circumstances." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The lady in the portrait, I presume?" "The one in the entrance hall, with eyes that seemed to follow." Lady Eleanor nodded. "Yes. Margaret was said to be beautiful but headstrong, married to Lord Henry Blackthorn, a man known for his temper. The story goes that she fell from the West Tower during a storm, though some whispered she was pushed. Her death was never fully explained, and since then tales of her ghost have persisted. Sightings of a woman in white, cries in the night, objects moving without cause." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And you believe these tales, madame?" "I am a rational woman," she replied, though her voice wavered. "But the recent disturbances, Clara's sighting, the anonymous letters, make me question what I believe. Margaret's story feels alive again." Poirot rose and approached the table, selecting a diary dated 1826. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded but legible. He read silently, his eyes scanning entries written in Margaret's elegant hand. They spoke of her love for the manor's gardens, her strained marriage to Henry, and cryptic references to a secret kept in stone. One entry, dated mere weeks before her death, chilled him. "He knows, and he will never forgive. I fear the walls themselves will betray me." "Most intriguing," Poirot murmured, closing the diary. "This secret, it may be the heart of our mystery. Madam, where might I find more about Lady Margaret?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. "The library holds more records, but some are locked away in the family vault. Only Charles has the key, as he oversees the estate's affairs." Poirot made a mental note to speak with Charles, whose brusque demeanour suggested a man with secrets of his own. He turned to the Chronicles of Ashmore, flipping to a section on Blackthorn Manor. The book detailed local legends, including one that described Margaret's ghost as a guardian of a hidden truth, doomed to wander until it was revealed. Poirot's logical mind dismissed the supernatural, but he recognized the power of such stories to inspire fear or deception. As he pondered, Beatrice entered the room, her movements hesitant. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I found something you should see." She held out a small, crumpled piece of paper, its edges singed as though it had been near a flame. Poirot took it carefully, noting the same handwriting as the anonymous letters Lady Eleanor had mentioned. The note read, "The ghost sees all. Leave Blackthorn, or the truth will bury you." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Where did you find this, mademoiselle?" "In my room," Beatrice replied, her hands trembling. "It was slipped under my door this morning." I thought it was a prank, but now I'm not sure." Poirot examined the paper, noting its coarse texture and faint smell of lavender, similar to Lady Eleanor's stationery. "A prank, perhaps," he said, "or a warning meant to frighten. Tell me, mademoiselle, do you believe in this ghost?" Beatrice's eyes darted to Lady Eleanor, then back to Poirot. "I don't know. I've heard things, footsteps, whispers. Last week I saw a shadow in the west wing, near the tower. It vanished when I called out." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. "Fear could distort perception, but it could also reveal truth. Merci, mademoiselle. This note, it is a piece of the puzzle. I will keep it." As Beatrice retreated, Dr. Mortimer entered, carrying a leather satchel. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his tone measured, "I understand you're investigating the Manor's history. As a scholar, I've studied the Blackthorns extensively. Would you care to hear my findings?" "Most certainly," Poirot replied, gesturing to a chair. Dr. Mortimer sat, opening his satchel to reveal a notebook filled with meticulous annotations. "The Blackthorn family has a history of conflict," he began. "Margaret's death was only one of many tragedies. There were rumours of a hidden fortune, gold or jewels, concealed somewhere in the manor. Some say Margaret died protecting it, others that she was killed for it." Poirot's interest sharpened. "And this fortune, it has never been found?" "Not to my knowledge," Dr. Mortimer said, "but the legend persists and it fuels the ghost stories. People believe Margaret's spirit guards it." Poirot smiled faintly. "A treasure, a ghost, a murder, this manor, it is a stage for drama. Tell me, Doctor, have you seen this ghostly figure?" Dr. Mortimer's expression remained impassive. "I've seen shadows, heard noises. But I'm a man of science. I suspect human hands behind these disturbances." "Précisément," Poirot said, his tone approving. "The human hand, it is often more cunning than any spectre." As the day wore on, Poirot continued his exploration, speaking briefly with Charles, who dismissed the ghost as superstitious nonsense, but seemed evasive about the family vault. Mrs. Grange, the housekeeper, recounted tales of flickering lights and cold spots, her pragmatism tinged with unease. Withers, the butler, remained stoic, claiming to have seen nothing unusual, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. By evening, Poirot retired to his guest room, a high-ceilinged chamber with heavy drapes and a four-poster bed. He sat at a small desk, reviewing the singed note and Margaret's diary. The pieces were scattered, but a pattern was forming. A tragic death, a hidden secret, and a household gripped by fear. The ghost, he suspected, was a tool, perhaps to conceal a crime, perhaps to unearth one. As he extinguished the lamp, a faint creak echoed from the corridor, followed by the softest whisper, like silk brushing stone. Poirot's hand paused on the lamp, his senses alert. The sound faded, but it left a certainty in his mind. Blackthorn Manor was alive with secrets, and he would uncover them, one whisper at a time. Chapter 4. The Midnight Apparition. The clock in the grand hall of Blackthorn Manor struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the silent corridors like a mournful toll. Hercule Poirot lay awake in his guest room, the heavy drapes drawn back to reveal a sliver of moonlight slicing across the floor. Sleep eluded him, not from discomfort, though the mattress was unforgivably lumpy for a man of his refined tastes. but from the restless hum of his little grey cells, the singed note, Lady Margaret's cryptic diary, and the whispered legends of a hidden fortune had woven a tapestry of intrigue, and Poirot was determined to unravel its threads. A sudden, eerie wail pierced the silence, faint but unmistakable, rising from somewhere deep within the manor. Poirot sat up, his senses sharpened. "Mon Dieu!" he murmured, slipping into his silk dressing-gown and adjusting his nightcap. "The ghost, it seems, does not respect the hours of rest." He lit a small oil lamp, its flickering glow casting long shadows, and stepped into the corridor. The West Wing, where Clara had reported her sighting, was his destination. The air grew colder as he navigated the labyrinthine passages. The walls adorned with faded tapestries that seemed to shift in the dim light. The wail came again, sharper now, followed by a soft thud, as though something had fallen. Poirot's polished shoes moved silently over the creaking floorboards, his eyes scanning for any sign of disturbance. At the end of the corridor, near the staircase to the West Tower, he paused. A faint glow emanated from the landing, not unlike moonlight, but colder, more ethereal. As he approached, the glow resolved into a figure, a woman in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by a veil of mist-like light. She hovered near the window, her form translucent, her movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, even Poirot's rational mind faltered, his breath catching as the figure turned, its eyes, dark and hollow, seeming to meet his. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving only a chill in the air and a faint scent of lavender. "Most curious," Poirot whispered, his composure returning. He examined the spot where the figure had stood, noting a faint smudge on the floor, as though dust had been disturbed. The window was tightly shut, its latch rusted, ruling out an external intruder. He knelt, his lamp illuminating a single pearl button, small and intricately carved, lying in the dust. "A clue, perhaps," he said, pocketing it with care. The sound of hurried footsteps broke his reverie. Beatrice appeared, her nightgown clutched tightly around her, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot!" she gasped. "I heard it, the cry. And then I saw you from my room. Was it her?" "Calm yourself, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice steady. "I have seen something, yes, but whether it is a ghost or a trick, that remains to be determined. Tell me, what did you hear?" "A wail, like a woman in pain," Beatrice said, trembling. "It came from the tower. I was too frightened to look, but I saw the light from my window." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Return to your room, mademoiselle. Lock the door and stay there until morning. I will investigate further." As Beatrice retreated, Poirot ascended the narrow staircase to the West Tower, the supposed site of Lady Margaret's fatal fall. The air grew heavier, the scent of damp stone mingling with lavender. At the top, he found a small circular chamber, its walls bare, save for a single cracked mirror. The window, overlooking the storm-soaked gardens, was ajar, its frame rattling in the wind. Poirot examined it closely, noting scratches on the sill, as though something or someone had climbed through recently. "Interessant," he murmured, his fingers tracing the marks. The scratches were fresh, the wood splintered, suggesting human intervention rather than spectral. He closed the window, securing it, and descended to the main house, his lamp casting long shadows that danced like conspirators. By morning, the household was abuzz with Clara's account of the night's events, her hysteria amplified by Beatrice's confirmation of the wail. Poirot gathered the residents in the dining room, where a meagre breakfast of toast and tea awaited. Lady Eleanor sat at the head, her expression strained, while Charles paced, his irritation palpable. Dr. Mortimer sipped his tea calmly, his eyes watchful, and Clara hovered near the door, wringing her hands. Withers served silently, his face a mask of indifference. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor began, "Clara tells me you witnessed the apparition. What do you make of it?" Poirot set down his cup, his movements deliberate. "Madam, I have seen a figure, yes, but Hercule Poirot does not leap to conclusions. I have questions for you all." He produced the pearl button, holding it up to the light. "This was found where the figure appeared. Does it belong to anyone here?" A collective murmur rippled through the room. Beatrice shook her head. Charles shrugged, and Lady Eleanor frowned. "It could be from an old garment," she said. "The manor is full of relics." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "But relics do not walk the halls at midnight. Monsieur Charles, you are familiar with the West Tower. Have you been there recently?" Charles stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "Not in months. It's a crumbling ruin, unsafe. Why do you ask?" "The window was open," Poirot replied, watching him closely, "and there were marks, fresh marks, on the sill. Someone has been there." Charles's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Dr. Mortimer leaned forward. "Monsieur Poirot, the tower is central to the legend of Lady Margaret. If someone is staging these sightings, they're exploiting that history." "Précisément," Poirot said. "But to what end? Fear, distraction, or perhaps to conceal a greater truth?" He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle, you saw the figure in the garden. Did it carry anything? A lantern, perhaps?" Clara hesitated, her eyes wide. "No, sir. Just the glow, like it wasn't human." Poirot's gaze shifted to Withers, who stood impassive. "And you, Monsieur Withers? You heard nothing last night?" "Nothing, sir," Withers replied, his voice flat. "I sleep soundly." Poirot smiled faintly, unconvinced. "Very well. I will continue my observations, but know this, the truth it cannot hide forever." As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the night's events. The figure's appearance was too convenient, too theatrical, suggesting a human hand behind the spectacle. The button, the scratches, the lavender scent, they pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception. But why? To drive someone from the manor? To protect a secret? Or to unearth the fabled fortune Dr. Mortimer had mentioned? He resolved to inspect the west wing further, particularly the tower's surroundings. As he stepped into the corridor, a faint creak sounded from above, followed by the soft clink of metal. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The manner it speaks," he said to himself, "and Hercule Poirot, he listens." Chapter 5. Secrets in the Hidden Library. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds, casting a pallid light over Blackthorn Manor, as Hercule Poirot stood in the entrance hall, his keen eyes fixed on the grand staircase. The events of the previous night, the ethereal figure in the west wing, the pearl button, and the fresh scratches on the tower's windowsill, had deepened his conviction that the ghostly disturbances were a facade for a human scheme. His little grey cells buzzed with possibilities, and he had decided to pursue a lead from Lady Eleanor's mention of the family vault, which Charles Blackthorn controlled. However, a chance remark from Mrs. Grange, the housekeeper, during breakfast had shifted his focus. A hidden library, rumoured to exist behind the manor's main library, where the Blackthorns kept their most private records. "Madame Grange," Poirot had said, his tone casual yet probing, "you spoke of a secret room. Where might one find such a place?" Mrs. Grange, flustered, had mumbled about old tales and a concealed door in the library, quickly excusing herself to tend to the kitchen. Poirot, ever alert to evasion, resolved to investigate immediately. The Manor's library was a cavernous room, its high ceilings lost in shadow, and its walls lined with shelves groaning under the weight of ancient tomes. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, filtering through tall, arched windows, and the air carried the musty scent of leather and aged paper. Poirot moved methodically, his gloved fingers tracing the spines of books, as he searched for a clue to the hidden entrance. He tapped panels, pressed mouldings, and examined the ornate fireplace, recalling countless mysteries where such features concealed secrets. His persistence was rewarded when he noticed a discrepancy in the shelving near a corner alcove. A section of books, bound in identical green leather, sat slightly askew, their edges not flush with the rest. Poirot pressed gently, and with a soft click, the shelf swung inward, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in darkness. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, a smile tugging at his moustache. "The Manor. It yields its secrets to Hercule Poirot." He retrieved a small flashlight from his pocket, always prepared for such eventualities, and stepped into the passage. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. The passage led to a small circular room, its walls lined with shelves of manuscripts, ledgers and letters, all meticulously organized but coated in dust. A single oak table stood at the center, holding a brass candelabrum and a locked wooden box. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A treasure trove of truths," he said softly, setting his flashlight down to explore. He began with the letters, many penned in the same elegant hand as Lady Margaret's diary. One, dated 1826, caught his attention, addressed to a dearest E. It read, "The weight of our secret grows heavier each day. Henry suspects, and his rage is a storm I cannot weather. The stone heart holds our truth, but I fear it will be my undoing." Poirot's brow furrowed. The stone heart again, a phrase from Margaret's diary. Was it a metaphor, or something tangible? Next he examined a ledger labelled Blackthorn Accounts, 1820 to 1830. Its pages detailed the family's finances, but one entry stood out. A payment of £500 to a Mr. J. Carver for masonry work in the West Wing. The date coincided with Margaret's final year, and Poirot noted the unusual sum for what seemed a minor repair. Masonry work, he mused, perhaps to conceal, not to build. The locked box intrigued him most. Its lid was carved with a rose entwined with thorns, a motif he'd seen in the Manor's tapestries. Lacking a key, he tested the lock with a hairpin from his pocket, a trick learned from less reputable acquaintances in his youth. The lock yielded with a satisfying click, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost letter, written in a hurried scrawl, was unsigned but chilling. "Margaret, your betrayal is known. The stone heart will be your grave." Poirot's pulse quickened. Betrayal, a hidden fortune, a threatening letter. The pieces were aligning, though the picture remained incomplete. He pocketed the letter, intending to confront Lady Eleanor about its contents, when a faint creak echoed from the passage. He extinguished his flashlight and stood motionless, his senses straining. Footsteps, light but deliberate, approached, then stopped. A shadow flickered at the entrance, and Poirot glimpsed a figure, too brief to identify, before it retreated. He emerged cautiously, finding the library empty, but the air charged with tension. The shelf had been left slightly ajar, suggesting the intruder had fled in haste. Poirot's mind raced. Who knew of this room? Charles, with his key to the vault? Dr. Mortimer, the historian? Or perhaps Clara, whose fear seemed to mask a deeper knowledge. At luncheon, Poirot observed the household with renewed scrutiny. Lady Eleanor, pale and distracted, picked at her food. Charles was brusque, snapping at Withers over a spilled glass. Beatrice sat silently, her eyes darting to the windows as though expecting the ghost to appear in daylight. Dr. Mortimer, ever composed, engaged Poirot in polite conversation about local folklore, but his questions felt probing, as though testing Poirot's progress. "Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Mortimer said, slicing his roast with precision, "have you made any discoveries about our spectral visitor?" Poirot smiled, his tone light. "The Manor is full of secrets, Doctor." "I find that history. It speaks louder than ghosts. Tell me, have you ever explored the hidden corners of this estate?" Dr. Mortimer's fork paused. "I've studied its records, but the Manor's architecture is a maze." "There are places even I haven't seen, indeed," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "And yet someone knows these places well." Charles interrupted, his voice sharp. "This is nonsense." "You're chasing shadows, Poirot. The ghost is a story to scare maids, nothing more perhaps," Poirot replied. "But stories, they often hide truths. I'm most curious about this stone heart mentioned in old letters. Does it mean anything to you?" A silence fell over the table. Lady Eleanor's hand trembled, spilling her tea. Beatrice gasped softly, and Charles's jaw tightened. Dr. Mortimer's eyes flickered with interest, but he said nothing. Withers, clearing plates, paused briefly, his expression unreadable. "It's a family legend," Lady Eleanor said at last, her voice strained. "A poetic term, nothing more. Margaret wrote of it in her diaries, but no one knows its meaning." Poirot nodded, unconvinced. The reaction confirmed his suspicion. The stone heart was no mere metaphor. He resolved to investigate the West Wing further, particularly the masonry work noted in the ledger. As the meal ended, he excused himself, citing a need to reflect in solitude. In the library, he examined the passage entrance again, finding a faint scuff mark on the floor, evidence of the intruder's presence. The hidden library had been a revelation, but it raised more questions. Who was he? What was the betrayal that threatened Margaret? And why was someone watching his movements? As evening fell, the Manor seemed to close in, its shadows lengthening. Poirot stood by his window, gazing at the gardens where Clara had seen the ghostly figure. The truth, he knew, was buried in the past, but someone in the present was desperate to keep it hidden. "The game, it becomes more complex," he murmured, his eyes gleaming with determination. "But Hercule Poirot, he will not be outplayed." Chapter 6. The Séance Deception. The air in Blackthorn Manor's drawing room was thick with tension. As dusk settled over the estate, the fading light casting long shadows across the velvet drapes and polished wood. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his sharp eyes observing the gathered household, each face a mask of unease or defiance. The idea of a séance had been proposed by Dr. Mortimer at dinner, ostensibly to contact the spirit of Lady Margaret and uncover the truth behind the ghostly sightings. Poirot, ever sceptical of the supernatural, had agreed to attend not out of belief, but to study the reactions of those present. He suspected the séance was a stage for deception, and he intended to watch the players closely. Lady Eleanor sat at the head of the round table, her hands folded tightly, her hazel eyes flickering with apprehension. Charles slouched in his chair, his scowl betraying his disdain for the proceedings. Beatrice, pale and trembling, clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. Dr. Mortimer, the orchestrator, arranged candles in a precise circle, his scholarly demeanour tinged with an unsettling enthusiasm. Clara, the maid, hovered near the door, her presence insisted upon by Dr. Mortimer, who claimed her sensitivity to the spirit was vital. Withers, the butler, stood by the wall, his expression as impassive as ever, while Mrs. Grange had declined to attend, citing a headache. "Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Mortimer said, lighting the final candle, "you are our guest of honour. Your logic may ground us if the spirits prove overwhelming." Poirot's moustache twitched. "I assure you, Doctor, my little grey cells are prepared for any eventuality, spiritual or otherwise." He took his seat, his posture impeccable, his senses alert for any hint of trickery. Dr. Mortimer dimmed the gas lamps, leaving the room bathed in the flickering glow of the candles. He instructed the group to join hands, forming a circle, and began a low chant, his voice resonant yet theatrical. "Lady Margaret Blackthorn, we seek your guidance. Reveal the truth that binds you to this manor." The words hung in the air, and Poirot noted Beatrice's grip tightening on his hand, her fingers cold and trembling. For several minutes, nothing happened. The silence was broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the creak of the manor's ancient timbers. Then a sudden gust rattled the windows, extinguishing 2 candles. Beatrice gasped, and Charles muttered, "This is absurd!" But before Poirot could speak, a low moan filled the room, rising into a wail that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Clara cried out, her chair scraping back, "It's her! Lady Margaret!" The table shuddered, a faint vibration that Poirot felt through his fingertips. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the room. The moan grew louder, and a cold draught swept through, carrying the familiar scent of lavender. Then, in the corner, a faint glow appeared, a shimmering outline of a woman in white, her veil obscuring her face. Beatrice screamed, breaking the circle, and Charles leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair. Lady Eleanor's face was ashen, her hands clutching the table's edge. Dr. Mortimer's voice rose, commanding the spirit to speak, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere. He noticed a faint glint near the corner where the figure stood, a reflection, perhaps, from a hidden mirror or glass. "Enough!" Poirot declared, his voice cutting through the chaos. He rose, relighting the candles with a match from his pocket. The figure vanished instantly, leaving only the echo of the moan. This performance, it is most impressive, but it is a performance nonetheless. Dr. Mortimer frowned, his composure faltering. "Monsieur Poirot, you doubt the evidence of your own eyes?" "I doubt what is staged for my eyes," Poirot replied, his tone sharp. He crossed to the corner, his flashlight sweeping the area. Behind a heavy curtain, he found a small mirror angled to catch the candlelight, creating the illusion of a glowing figure. Nearby, a thin wire led to a concealed panel in the wall, suggesting a mechanism for the table's vibration. "A clever trick," Poirot said, holding up the mirror for all to see. "The moan, the draught, the shaking table, these are the tools of a charlatan, not a spirit." Charles's face reddened. "Are you accusing one of us? This is outrageous." "Not an accusation, monsieur," Poirot said calmly, "but an observation. Someone in this room, or perhaps nearby, wished to convince us of a ghost. I wonder why Lady Eleanor's voice trembled. Monsieur Poirot, if this is a deception, what is its purpose? To frighten us? To drive us away?" "Or to distract," Poirot said, his eyes scanning the group. "A spectacle draws attention from other truths. Tell me, who suggested this séance?" All eyes turned to Dr. Mortimer, who raised his hands defensively. "I proposed it to test the legend, nothing more. As a scholar, I am curious about the Manor's mysteries. Curiosity or calculation? Poirot asked, his gaze piercing. He turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, you were quick to name Lady Margaret. Have you seen this set-up before? Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. No, sir. I swear I only felt something, like she was here. Poirot nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to press further yet. He examined the wire, tracing it to the panel, which opened to reveal a small hollow containing a phonograph needle and a tiny bellows, tools for creating sound and drafts. Most ingenious, he said, but the question remains, who benefits from this masquerade? Beatrice, still clutching her rosary, whispered, It's the curse. Margaret's angry. She wants us gone. Poirot's smile was gentle but firm. Mademoiselle, a curse does not require mirrors or wires. This is the work of a human hand, and I will find it. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the séance's details. The lavender scent, the mirror's angle, the phonograph, each pointed to preparation, not spontaneity. Someone had planned this, perhaps to reinforce the ghost story, perhaps to conceal a greater crime. The mention of the stone heart in Margaret's letters loomed large. Was it the key to the fortune, or to her murder? He approached Lady Eleanor, who remained at the table, her face drawn. Madame, this deception, it is tied to your family's past. I must see the family vault. Monsieur Charles, he has the key, yes? Lady Eleanor nodded. He does, but he's reluctant to open it. He says it's unsafe, but I suspect he fears what you might find. Fear, Poirot said softly. It is a powerful motive. I will speak with him. As he left the drawing-room, a faint creak sounded from the ceiling, a reminder of the Manor's watchful presence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The séance had been a deception, but it had revealed more than its orchestrator intended, suspicion, fear, and hidden motives. The truth was closer, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was laid bare. Chapter 7. Shadows of Suspicion. The morning after the staged séance, Blackthorn Manor seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Hercule Poirot sat in the library, his coffee cup pristine beside a notebook where he'd jotted observations. The mirror, the phonograph, the lavender scent, all elements of a carefully crafted illusion. The séance had exposed not only a deception, but also fractures in the household, each member's reaction revealing glimpses of their true selves. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, piecing together motives and opportunities. He resolved to interrogate each resident individually, for he suspected the ghostly charade was a distraction from a deeper truth, perhaps tied to Lady Margaret's stone heart, or the rumoured Blackthorn fortune. He began with Charles Blackthorn, summoning him to the library under the pretence of discussing estate records. Charles arrived, his tweed jacket rumpled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, or perhaps something stronger. Monsieur Poirot, he said, slumping into a chair, this ghost nonsense is wearing thin. What do you want from me? Poirot's smile was disarming. Clarity, Monsieur Charles. You manage the estate, yet you dismiss the disturbances as superstition. Tell me, where were you during the séance's theatrics? Charles's jaw tightened. In my chair, like everyone else. I didn't rig mirrors or play ghost. I told you, it's all rubbish. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone mild, but the Manor's secrets, they are not rubbish. The family vault, for instance. You hold the key, yet you refuse to open it. Why? Charles shifted, his fingers drumming the armrest. It's a crumbling mess. Dangerous. Besides, it's just old junk. Papers, trinkets. Nothing worth your time. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet you guard it closely. The ledger I found mentions masonry work in the west wing, near the time of Lady Margaret's death. Was something hidden there, perhaps? A fortune? Charles laughed, a harsh sound. That old tale. If there was gold, I'd have found it by now. The Blackthorns are broke, Poirot. This manor's a money pit. Poirot noted the bitterness in his voice, filing it away. One last question, monsieur. The pearl button I found in the west wing, does it belong to you? Charles frowned, shaking his head. Never seen it. Ask Beatrice. She's always fussing with old clothes. Dismissing Charles, Poirot next called for Beatrice, who entered the library like a frightened doe, her rosary still clutched tightly. Her eyes darted to the shelves, as though expecting the ghost to emerge from the books. Mademoiselle, Poirot began gently, you were most distressed last night. Tell me, what do you fear most about this ghost? Beatrice's voice was a whisper. It's Lady Margaret. She's angry because of the secret. I've heard her, Monsieur Poirot, whispering my name at night. Poirot leaned forward. And this secret, what do you know of it? Her hands trembled. Only what Aunt Eleanor says, that Margaret died protecting something. I found a note once in the garden saying, the stone heart will claim you. I burned it. I was so scared. Poirot's moustache twitched. Another note, destroyed, convenient or genuine fear. This note, it was like the others? In the same hand? Beatrice nodded, tears welling. Yes, but I didn't keep it. I thought it was a curse. Poirot patted her hand, his tone soothing. Fear not, mademoiselle. Hercule Poirot will protect you from curses, real or imagined. But tell me, have you been to the West Tower recently? She shook her head vehemently. Never. It's forbidden. Charles says it's unsafe. Next, Poirot spoke with Dr. Mortimer, who arrived with his usual scholarly calm, his satchel bulging with notes. Monsieur Poirot, he said, adjusting his glasses, I assume you wish to discuss the séance. I assure you, I intended only to test the legend indeed, Poirot said, his eyes sharp. Yet the mirror, the phonograph, these suggest planning, not curiosity. You are a man of history, Doctor. Have you uncovered anything about the stone heart mentioned in Margaret's letters? Dr. Mortimer's expression remained neutral. It's a poetic phrase, likely referring to a family heirloom or metaphor for betrayal. My research points to a scandal. Margaret was rumoured to have a lover, which enraged Lord Henry. Poirot's interest sharpened. A lover? This is new. And where might one find evidence of this? The vault, perhaps, Dr. Mortimer said, but Charles is protective of it. Poirot nodded, sensing evasion. And last night, where were you before the séance began? In my room, preparing my notes, Dr. Mortimer replied smoothly. I joined the others just before we began. Clara was next, her nervousness palpable as she stood before Poirot, twisting her apron. Mademoiselle Clara, he said, you named Lady Margaret during the séance. Why were you so certain it was her? Clara's eyes widened. I've seen her, sir, in the garden, the west wing. She's pale, like in the stories. And the lavender, I smell it whenever she's near. Poirot leaned closer. And this lavender, it is familiar, perhaps from the Manor's stores. Clara hesitated. Maybe. Lady Eleanor uses lavender sachets, but it's stronger, like it's part of the ghost. Finally, Poirot summoned Withers, whose stoic demeanour was unshaken. Monsieur Withers, Poirot said, you claim to hear nothing, see nothing. Yet you move through this manor like a shadow. Have you noticed anything unusual? Perhaps someone near the west wing? Withers's eyes flickered briefly. "I keep to my duties, sir. The west wing is rarely used, but I've seen Clara there, late at night, claiming she was checking windows." Poirot's mind seized on this. Clara in the west wing? Her fear seemed genuine, but could it mask complicity? "Merci, Withers. Your observation is most helpful." As the interviews concluded, Poirot retired to his room, his notebook filled with contradictions. Charles's defensiveness about the vault, Beatrice's burned note, Dr. Mortimer's convenient absence, Clara's nocturnal wanderings, Withers's watchful silence, each cast a shadow of suspicion. The stone heart remained elusive, but Poirot sensed it was central, perhaps a literal object tied to the masonry work or a symbol of betrayal. A sudden knock interrupted his thoughts. Lady Eleanor stood at the door, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I've found another letter slipped under my door this morning." She handed him a note, its handwriting matching the others. "The stone heart will be opened. Leave or perish." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "This is no ghost, madame, but a human hand growing desperate. I must see the vault. Arrange for Charles to open it tomorrow." Lady Eleanor nodded, her voice trembling. "I'll try, but be careful, Monsieur Poirot. The Manor, it feels alive with malice." As she left, a faint creak sounded from the corridor, a reminder of the Manor's watchful eyes. Poirot smiled grimly. Malice, perhaps, but Hercule Poirot is not so easily intimidated. The shadows, they will yield. Chapter 8. The Forgotten Crypt. The wind howled around Blackthorn Manor as Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the overgrown garden, his overcoat buttoned against the chill of the late October afternoon. The latest threatening note, slipped under Lady Eleanor's door, had intensified his resolve to uncover the truth behind the stone heart and the ghostly apparitions. His interviews had painted a picture of a household fractured by fear and suspicion, and Charles's reluctance to open the family vault suggested a secret worth protecting. Yet a new lead had emerged during a chance conversation with Mrs. Grange, who mentioned an old crypt beneath the Manor's west wing, long sealed and forgotten. Poirot, sensing a connection to the mysterious masonry work noted in the 1820s ledger, decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a small crowbar, procured discreetly from the Manor's tool shed, Poirot descended a narrow staircase behind a rusted iron gate, which Mrs. Grange had reluctantly pointed out. The air grew damp and heavy, smelling of earth and decay, as he navigated the uneven stone steps. The crypt's entrance was concealed behind a false wall in the cellar, its existence known only to a few. "A perfect place to hide a secret," Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching with anticipation. The crypt was a low, vaulted chamber, its walls lined with moss-covered stone and ancient sarcophagi bearing the Blackthorn crest. Cobwebs draped the corners like tattered curtains, and the faint drip of water echoed in the silence. Poirot's flashlight swept across the space, revealing a series of niches, some containing urns, others empty. At the far end, a large stone slab caught his eye, its surface carved with the same rose and thorn motif he'd seen on the locked box in the hidden library. Unlike the other stones, it was slightly askew, as though how recently disturbed. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, kneeling to examine the slab. His fingers traced the edges, finding faint scratches and a thin layer of fresh mortar, suggesting recent work. The ledger's entry about masonry in the west wing flashed in his mind. Had something been sealed here after Lady Margaret's death? He tested the slab with the crowbar, its weight yielding slightly under pressure. With a grunt of effort, he pried it open, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside lay a leather pouch, its surface cracked with age but intact. Poirot opened it carefully, finding a collection of items. A locket engraved with the initials M.B., a folded letter, and a small heart-shaped stone pendant, its surface smooth but unremarkable. The letter in Margaret's hand was brief but damning. To E, my heart is yours, but Henry's wrath will destroy us. The stone heart is hidden where none will look, beneath the thorns of our sin. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The stone heart, he said softly. Not a fortune, perhaps, but a secret worth killing for. The locket contained a miniature portrait of a young man, not Lord Henry, suggesting the lover Dr. Mortimer had mentioned. The pendant, though plain, felt significant, perhaps a key to a larger truth. As he pocketed the items, a faint scuffle sounded from the staircase. Poirot doused his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, his senses alert. A figure descended, their footsteps cautious but heavy. The dim light revealed Charles Blackthorn, his face tense, a lantern in one hand and a small spade in the other. He froze upon seeing the open slab, his eyes widening. "Poirot!" he exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and panic. "What the devil are you doing here?" Poirot stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Monsieur Charles, it seems we both seek answers in the shadows. Care to explain why you are here, with a spade, in a crypt you claimed was forgotten?" Charles's grip tightened on the spade. I was checking the foundations, the west wing's unstable. You shouldn't be. Here. It's dangerous, indeed, Poirot said, holding up the pouch, but not for the reasons you suggest. This, I believe, is tied to Lady Margaret's death. A secret you perhaps wish to keep buried? Charles's face darkened. You're meddling in things you don't understand, Poirot. That's nothing but old trinkets that someone has gone to great lengths to hide, Poirot countered, and to frighten others away from, with ghosts and threatening notes. Before Charles could respond, a sharp cry echoed from above, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Poirot and Charles exchanged a glance, then hurried up the stairs, emerging into the cellar to find Clara, her face pale, clutching a broom. "I saw it again," she gasped. "The woman in white, in the garden, near the old oak." Poirot's mind raced. Another sighting, timed perfectly to interrupt his discovery. Coincidence or design? "Show me," he said, following Clara to the garden, Charles trailing reluctantly behind. The garden was a tangle of overgrown roses, their thorns gleaming in the fading light. Clara pointed to a gnarled oak, its branches twisted like skeletal fingers. "There, sir!" She was standing there, then vanished. Poirot examined the ground, finding fresh footprints in the damp earth, small, likely a woman's, and leading toward the Manor's west wing. He noted a faint lavender scent, the same that had accompanied every ghostly encounter. "Most interesting," he murmured, his eyes scanning the shadows. Turning to Charles, he said, "Monsieur, I will see the family vault tomorrow, with or without your cooperation. The truth, it is close, and I will not be deterred." Charles's expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. As they returned to the manor, Poirot's thoughts churned. The crypt's contents confirmed a scandal. Margaret's lover, a hidden truth, but the pendant's purpose eluded him. Was it a symbol, or something more? And who was orchestrating the ghostly sightings to keep him from the truth? At dinner the household was subdued, the weight of Poirot's discoveries palpable. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled as she poured tea. Beatrice avoided his gaze, and Dr. Mortimer's usual calm seemed strained. Clara served silently, her eyes darting nervously, while Withers moved with his usual stoicism. Poirot observed them all, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The crypt, the letters, the footprints, the lavender. As the meal ended, he addressed the group. Mes amis, the ghost of Blackthorn Manor is no spirit, but a shadow cast by human hands. I have found evidence that points to a secret buried long ago, one that someone here fears will be uncovered. Tomorrow, I will open the vault and the truth will be revealed. A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. Poirot's eyes met each pair in turn, searching for a flicker of guilt. The crypt had given him a piece of the puzzle, but the final picture was still forming. The game, he thought, it grows more dangerous, but Hercule Poirot will not falter. Chapter 9. Revelations Under Moonlight. The moon hung low over Blackthorn Manor, its silver light filtering through the tangled branches of the garden's ancient oaks, casting eerie shadows across the dew-soaked lawn. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall windows of the drawing-room, his silhouette sharp against the flickering firelight within. The discoveries in the crypt, the locket, the letter and the Stoneheart pendant had brought him tantalizingly close to unravelling the mystery of Lady Margaret's death and the ghostly disturbances. Yet the threatening notes, the staged séance, and the fresh footprints in the garden pointed to a living hand, orchestrating the fear that gripped the household. Tonight, Poirot had decided to force the truth into the open, using the manor's own atmosphere of suspense to his advantage. He had requested a gathering in the garden at midnight, ostensibly to confront the ghost where Clara had last seen it, near the old oak. The household, though sceptical, agreed, their nerves frayed by the mounting tension. Lady Eleanor, Charles, Beatrice, Dr. Mortimer, Clara, and Withers assembled under the gnarled tree, their faces pale in the moonlight. Poirot, his overcoat impeccable despite the chill, held a lantern, its glow illuminating the circle of uneasy figures. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice steady but resonant. We stand where the so-called ghost of Lady Margaret has been seen, but Hercule Poirot does not believe in ghosts. This figure, it is a deception, designed to hide a truth buried for a century. Tonight, we will uncover it. Charles scoffed, his breath visible in the cold air. This is madness, Poirot. Standing in the cold, chasing shadows? I've had enough patience, Monsieur Charles, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The shadows, they speak if one listens. I have found evidence, a locket, a letter, a pendant, that points to a scandal in 1827. Lady Margaret had a lover, and her death was no accident. Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand clutching her shawl. A lover? Monsieur Poirot, that's a grave accusation. What proof do you have? Poirot produced the locket from his pocket, its miniature portrait glinting in the lantern light. This, madame, found in the crypt, bears the initials M.B. and the face of a man not Lord Henry. Her letter speaks of a stone heart hidden beneath thorns, a secret worth killing for. Beatrice's eyes widened, her rosary slipping from her fingers to the grass. The stone heart. I told you about the note I burned. It mentioned that. Précisément, Poirot said, turning to her. And someone in this manor knows its meaning, using the ghost to keep us from it. The footprints I found here tonight, small, feminine, suggest a living conspirator. Clara whimpered, stepping back. Not me, sir. I only saw her, I swear. Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. Mademoiselle Clara, your fear is genuine, but your presence in the West Wing at night raises questions. And you, Monsieur Withers, you saw her there. Why? Withers's stoic mask faltered, his eyes darting to Charles. I thought she was checking windows, as she said. I meant no harm, Dr. Mortimer interjected, his voice calm but strained. Monsieur Poirot, you're suggesting one of us is behind this? The séance was my idea, but only to test the legend. I've no part in trickery, perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, but the lavender scent, it follows every sighting. Lady Eleanor, you use lavender sachets, do you not? Lady Eleanor stiffened. Yes, but so do many households. You cannot think I'd stage such a thing. Before Poirot could reply, a sudden rustle came from the rose thicket nearby, followed by a faint glow. The same ethereal light he'd seen in the west wing. The group froze, Beatrice stifling a scream. The figure in white appeared, its veil shimmering, moving slowly towards the oak. Poirot, undaunted, raised his lantern and strode forward, his voice commanding, "Enough! Reveal yourself, or face the consequences of Hercule Poirot." The figure halted, and with a soft laugh, the veil fell away, revealing not a ghost, but Mrs. Grange, her face pale but defiant, a lantern hidden beneath her cloak creating the glow. "You're too clever, monsieur," she said, her voice steady despite the gasps around her. "Mrs. Grange!" Lady Eleanor exclaimed. "Why, what is this?" Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Madame Grange, you have played the ghost admirably, but your motives, they intrigue me." Speak Mrs. Grange's eyes flickered with defiance, then softened. "I meant no harm, only to protect the manor. My family has served the Blackthorns for generations. My great-grandmother was Margaret's maid, and she told me of the stone heart, a pendant Margaret hid to protect her lover's identity. I found it years ago, but kept it secret, fearing it would ruin the family's name." Poirot held up the pendant from the crypt. "This, madame?" "It is no mere trinket. It is a key, is it not?" Mrs. Grange nodded, her voice low. "It opens a compartment in the vault, where Margaret hid letters proving her lover was a local man, not a noble. Lord Henry killed her in a rage when he learned of it. I staged the ghost to keep Charles from selling the manor. He's been planning to pay debts. The scandal would destroy the Blackthorn legacy." Charles's face reddened. "You had no right. The manor's a burden, and I need the money." Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Grange, you should have told me." "We could have faced this together." Poirot raised a hand. "Madame Grange, your loyalty is admirable, but your methods, they caused fear and confusion. And the threatening notes? Mine," she admitted, "to scare off buyers and keep Charles from digging into the vault." Poirot's eyes swept the group. "The truth, it emerges under moonlight." "But one question remains. The vault's contents, do they still exist?" Mrs. Grange hesitated, then nodded. "The letters are there, hidden behind a panel the pendant unlocks." Poirot smiled grimly. "Then tomorrow we open the vault. The ghost of Lady Margaret, it is laid to rest, but the truth, it will speak." As the group dispersed, the moonlight seemed to soften, the manor's oppressive air lifting slightly. Poirot lingered by the oak, his mind already turning to the vault's secrets. Mrs. Grange's confession had revealed much, but he sensed one final twist awaited. "The game," he murmured, "it is not yet over." Chapter 10. The Unveiling of Truth. The grand drawing-room of Blackthorn Manor was bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps, their light flickering across the faces of the assembled household. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his posture impeccable, his moustache perfectly symmetrical, his green eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a man who had solved a puzzle. The revelations in the garden the previous night had unmasked Mrs. Grange as the orchestrator of the ghostly apparitions. But the final piece of the mystery, the contents of the family vault and the true nature of the stone heart, awaited. Poirot had insisted on a gathering to open the vault and lay bare the secrets of Lady Margaret's death, and the air was thick with anticipation and dread. Lady Eleanor sat rigidly, her hands clasped, her face a mask of resolve tempered by fear. Charles paced near the fireplace, his agitation evident in his clenched fists. Beatrice, clutching her rosary, seemed on the verge of tears, while Dr. Mortimer leaned forward in his chair, his scholarly curiosity undimmed. Clara stood by the door, her eyes downcast, and Mrs. Grange, now exposed, sat apart, her expression a mix of defiance and shame. Withers, as always, was a silent sentinel, his face betraying nothing. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, "we have journeyed through shadows and deceptions, but tonight Hercule Poirot will bring light to the mystery of Blackthorn Manor. The ghost of Lady Margaret, it was no spirit, but a ruse by Madame Grange to protect a secret. Yet the heart of this mystery lies in the family vault, which we shall now open." Charles stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is unnecessary, Poirot. You've caught your ghost. Let's be done with it." Poirot's smile was serene but unyielding. "Non, Monsieur Charles. The ghost was a distraction, but the truth, it is tied to Lady Margaret's death and the stone heart. You have the key. Lead us to the vault." With a scowl, Charles produced a heavy iron key from his pocket and led the group to the cellar, where a reinforced door, half hidden behind a stack of crates, marked the vault's entrance. The air grew colder as they descended, the scent of damp stone mingling with the faint lavender that had haunted every ghostly encounter. Charles unlocked the door with a reluctant twist, revealing a small, musty chamber, lined with shelves of dusty ledgers and locked boxes. Poirot held up the stone heart pendant from the crypt, its rose and thorn motif catching the lantern light. "This, I believe, is the key to the final truth." He approached a panel on the far wall, its carving matching the pendant's design. With a gentle press, the pendant clicked into place, and the panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a bundle of letters, their paper brittle but intact, tied with a faded ribbon. Poirot carefully untied them, his gloved hands steady. The topmost letter, in Lady Margaret's hand, was addressed to E, and dated 1827, the year of her death. He read aloud, "My dearest Edmund, our love is a flame that Henry cannot extinguish, but I fear his rage. The stone heart pendant, a gift from you, hides our truth in the vault. If I fall, let it be found, so our story lives." The room was silent, save for Beatrice's soft gasp. Poirot continued, selecting another letter, this one in a different hand, rougher and angrier. "Margaret, your betrayal seals your fate. The tower will be your end." It was unsigned, but the implication was clear. "Lord Henry," Poirot said, his voice grave. "He discovered Margaret's affair with Edmund, a man of no title, and in his jealousy he pushed her from the West Tower. The masonry work noted in the ledger was to seal the pendant, and these letters in the crypt hiding the scandal." Lady Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Then Margaret was murdered?" "Oui, madame," Poirot said, "but the story does not end there. Madame Grange, you knew of this, did you not?" Mrs. Grange nodded, her voice low. "My great-grandmother was Margaret's maid. She told me the truth, passed down through our family. I found the pendant years ago and hid it again, fearing the scandal would ruin the Blackthorns. When Charles planned to sell the manor, I use the ghost to scare off buyers, to protect the legacy." Charles's face twisted with anger. "You had no right. The Manor's debts are crushing us. I needed to sell." Poirot raised a hand. "Monsieur Charles, your desperation is understandable, but your secrecy about the vault suggests more. Did you know of the letters?" Charles hesitated, then shook his head. "I suspected there was something, old rumours of a fortune." "But I never found anything," Dr. Mortimer interjected, his tone measured. "Monsieur Poirot, this explains the legend, but what of the threatening notes?" Mrs. Grange admitted to some, but not all. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A most perceptive question, Doctor." "The notes, they varied. Some, like those Mrs. Grange wrote, were to frighten, but others, like the one slipped under Madame Eleanor's door, were in a different hand." He turned to Clara, who shrank under his gaze. "Mademoiselle Clara, you have been most quiet. Yet Withers saw you in the West Wing at night, and the footprints in the garden were small, like yours. Why?" Clara's eyes widened, her hands trembling. I was curious, sir. I heard stories, saw the ghost. I found a note in the West Wing and copied it, thinking it would make Charles stop digging into the vault. I didn't mean harm." Poirot's expression softened, but his voice was firm. "Curiosity or fear of discovery. You knew more than you admitted, perhaps from Mrs. Grange's tales. But your notes added to the chaos. Beatrice, her voice trembling, spoke up. So there's no ghost." "No curse?" "Non, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "Only human greed, love, and betrayal. The stone heart was Margaret's love for Edmund, preserved in these letters. Her death was a tragedy, not a haunting." Lady Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite her tears. "Monsieur Poirot, you've given us the truth." "What now?" Poirot closed the compartment, the letters in his hand. "The truth. It is yours to keep or share. The scandal is old, its pain faded, but the Manor, it is free of its ghost." As the group ascended to the drawing-room, the Manor seemed lighter, its oppressive air lifted. Poirot lingered in the vault, his eyes on the pendant. The mystery was solved, but he felt a pang for Margaret, her love silenced by violence. "The heart," he murmured, "it always speaks, even in death." The next morning, as Poirot prepared to depart, Lady Eleanor thanked him, her gratitude heartfelt. Charles, subdued, promised to preserve the Manor. Beatrice smiled faintly, her rosary at rest. Dr. Mortimer nodded, his curiosity sated, while Clara and Mrs. Grange stood together. Their roles in the deception forgiven but not forgotten. Poirot boarded the Rolls-Royce, the Manor's grim facade receding in the distance. "Another puzzle solved," he said to himself, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. "And Hercule Poirot, he remains undefeated by